food is a really powerful narrator of culture, right? Who was here before? Who came here? What happened next? Where are we going? And so like California, for example, was so special to me in my culinary roots and my approach because California is a melting pot of cultures, and you've been there and we've talked about it. But you've got this melting pot of cultures, and it's backed up with this very strong agricultural resource. But then because of all of that, there's a little bit of a rebellious kind of nature to it. Everyone in California tends to color outside the line. You want to do Mexican, Chinese food? Okay, fine, let's do it. And then New England is so humble and so pragmatic and so honest. It's so simple. Drawing bounty from the Atlantic Ocean, the bountiful Atlantic Ocean. And then on top of that, you have to be resourceful because there ain't shit that grows there in the wintertime. There's not much. And then there's the American South, which we had this ongoing love affair for the past, over 10 years now, which is such a beautiful, rich, albeit painful story about its food and its food ways and where it came from and how it evolved to what it is now. Southern food is not all fried chicken and barbecue. It's far from that. There's a beautiful history of food preservation in like the Appalachian parts of the country. There's that beautiful rice culture that's peppered with African history along the coast. All the food scenes, to me, they're all so different and beautiful. But what I love about them is they all tell a story because that's what food does.
Behind every amazing flavor is an amazing human who has perfected their craft. Welcome to Flavors Unknown, a behind-the-scenes look at new flavors and the chefs, pastry chefs, and bartenders who create them, with your host, Emmanuel.
My guest today is Chef Levon Wallace, based in Nashville, Tennessee. At the beginning of the pandemic, this executive chef had to switch gears and start a new business baking unique pretzels. The name of his business is called Fat Belly Pretzels. Welcome to episode 69 of the Flavors Unknown podcast. I am your host, Emmanuel Laroche, and if you are new to this podcast, I have been working in the food industry for more than 20 years, both in Europe and in the US. And every other week, I share the true story, successes, and challenges from renowned culinary leaders and how their cultural heritage shape their creative process. You can find all the episodes of the podcast on the website flavorsunknown.com. And please follow us on Spotify and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Chef Levon Wallace talks about the future of the industry, the difference in being a chef at boutique hotel, private restaurants, and fast casual businesses. He's passionate about building relationship with local farmers and purveyors, and he describes the difference and commonalities of the food scene between California, the Northeast, Louisville, and Nashville. Hi, Chef. How are you?
Hey, how are you, Emmanuel? Thanks for having us, too. Really love the podcast. I've heard a couple of episodes, and I really enjoy it. So thanks so much for having us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. So let's go right into it. So you are based, in Nashville area, and you have created recently a brand new concept called Fat Belly Pretzels. So
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about it? What is it?
Yeah, absolutely. Fat Belly Pretzel, as the name implies, they're these pretzels that have skinny arms and a big fat belly, just like me. So I named the product after me. Fat Belly Pretzel, the concept is really kind of born from this desire to make people happy, and it kind of brought me. For me, it was an aha moment of, oh, this is again a reminder of why I've been in the food service industry for, over 20 years, with the way that COVID happened. I mean, I've been, like I mentioned, I've been a professional chef for my entire life. It's all I've ever done professionally for work, and also passion, of course. I mean, it's what it is. And when COVID came, I was actually in the process of partnering with some associates, some people, some very, very talented people who I hold in high regard in Louisville, Kentucky. And I was bouncing between Nashville and Louisville, and we were going to open a few restaurants and a couple of concepts. One of them was going to be a kind of a Southern Mexican restaurant through a California lens, because those are my roots. I'm from Los Angeles, California. But, and then COVID hit, and the whole world had to stop, and nobody felt it more than the restaurant industry. So I came back home and unemployed for the first time in my life. No one's hiring, executive chefs or, the kind of, jobs that I'd grown into over the past decade plus. And so I was just kind of bumming around my house a little bit, and I was starting to get a little down on myself. And
yeah,
I decided,
it's a tough time. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a tough time. There's a lot on your mind. What are you going to do? What's going to happen to the industry? And I decided to do what I know how to do best, which is do something for someone else. That usually works 9 times out of 10 to get me out of any kind of situation. And so I made these pretzels for my kids. And they came out of the oven, and the kids were so happy. And my wife was like, "Oh my God, these are amazing." And we're having a really good time. And they've got this big belly, and there's we make a lame kind of a slash on the belly, and it has a big smile on them, and everyone's like, "Oh man, these are really great." And, my wife had this great idea. So, hey, let's have a bake sale this weekend. And, people started showing up, and here we are almost a year later.
Wow, yeah.
And having a really good time. And
so it's really like a direct outcome from the pandemic, and it's really you pivoted on, what you were supposed to do, but could not do because of the situation, and, transform like a great comfort food that you were doing at home and make it to accessible to, many.
Yeah. And that was the thing too. It was that, when we had a couple of, kind of pop up pre-order, hey, very under the table, like, hey, set up a Facebook page or something like, hey, come by this address from 2 to 4. And then we started to see that every time you handed someone this pretzel, and you mentioned the comfort food part, everybody's got just gets so excited, because everyone's got a story behind a pretzel. And, my grandpa used to take me to the ballpark, and we would always share a pretzel. Or when I lived in New York, after a long day at work, I would get a pretzel and get on the subway. And then everyone has all these stories and this kind of like attachment to a pretzel, which I, had no idea was there, but it is. And it's that human connection, that thing that, who doesn't love a hot pretzel? It's kind of hard to get bummed out when you get a hot pretzel, like there's nothing.
With a nice cheesy sauce on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Cheese sauce or mustard or whatever you want to do.
Yep. Sure.
And so that's kind of it's really how Fat Belly Pretzels started. And we adapted this little logo or saying it's spread love like mustard, Fat Belly Pretzels, spread love like mustard, because it's at the time in which it was born, the company or the project was born at a time when we all really kind of needed to just stop. I mean, think about a year ago where we were as a society, as everyone, there's so much uncertainty going on. There was all this like division going on. It's like, let's just stop, focus on what's important, and what's important to me, especially in food, is things that are, handmade, homemade, simple, good food made from real ingredients. I've always had a kind of a thing with, food that's obviously not made by a human being. You go to the mall and you get a pretzel, or you go to the ballpark and you get a pretzel, and, that thing came out of a box. I'm not into that,
But did you have to adapt a bit? Because, you had, as you mentioned before, you had so many years of being like an executive chef and into, different business model. We are going to talk about that a bit later, but definitely, fine dining as well. So, and now you have your own company and you are doing, this pretzel. It's probably like a shock. I mean, it's really different from what you used to do before. How did you manage that personally?
I personally am enjoying every twist and turn, pun intended, with the whole situation. Well, because here's the thing, and outside of the obvious, the financial downfall and of course the human tragedy part of what's transpired since COVID came here, is that particularly in the food service and chefs, restaurateurs, you know, that's all we do is pivot. It's all we've ever done is adapt,
Sure.
and you adapt and you overcome. And you know, sometimes
Being resilient. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Sometimes the dishwasher doesn't show up. You know, sometimes the walk-in goes out in the middle of service, and you lost, you know, $2,000 worth of product or whatever it is. And it's what you do and how you deal with it. And so, what's been amazing about this whole process is that rather than having to manage this multifaceted, you know, whether it's a couple of high volume restaurants with their own chefs that report to me, and you know, we're going to work on menu development, and we're going to work on all these things and leadership and whatever it may be, P&L, the whole gamut. It's a very hyper focused end result. You know, we're going to make some really, really good pretzels. We're going to take all that stuff I mentioned and apply it, and however it works, right? I mean, I'm making P&Ls for my
Sure.
very, very small business, right? But we're going to get rid of all the noise and just focus on one simple thing, which is doing the best thing that we can right now in front of us and trying to make other people happy.
You created kind of like a fast casual, you know, type of concept, or it could go that way. So I've seen a lot of chefs that are testing, like, you know, a lot of fast casual concepts. So, but how do you maintain a certain level of quality and as well, you know, ethic when to avoid that, in fact, that there's a confusion of genre with, you know, fast food, and it's not fast food. So how you do that?
I think it boils down to core values, right? Everything boils down to a core value. What is the mission statement? You can't translate something you don't have going on, right? Like I can't tell you that I'm all about local, handmade, quality food, and then turn around and open a can of cheese sauce and try and pass it off as is. You know, that's just how it works. It's a really complicated question. Here's why. I think that we're in this beautiful time period. It can be, look at it that way. Look at it as an opportunity to grow and reset, a hard reset to what we do and how we've done it. And not just for chefs and operators and restaurateurs, but also for customers and consumers. You know, I think that there is a conversation that needs to be really considered from a consumer level to an operator level, because things are not the way that they used to be. Somewhere along the lines of that, you know, you can't disguise, you know, McDonald's for something that's farm to table, right? So it is about integrity of ingredients. It is about, you know, integrity of preparation, but then finding that balance because of the change that is happening culturally, right? With technology, with online ordering and delivery and all these things need to be rethought. But fast casual and translating those things, you know, it's a delicate balance. It's definitely a delicate balance to be able to pull that off with the expectation that's there, again, from the consumer level. You know, I think that it's a little bit of gray area when you walk into a fast casual restaurant, that because things are quick and typically more value minded or value oriented, you know, you kind of expect a certain experience. And, you know, McDonald's is McDonald's, or I don't even want to mention their name, but, you know, fast casual is not fast food, in my opinion.
And is it where you are going to take your concept, you know, growing the concept in the future as a fast casual concept?
I think that the environment dictates that. And I think that's really where we're all kind of headed at this point. The generation that is coming up now, the generation of consumer and diner, is doesn't want to sit and have a full experience. You may want a little bit of that, but you know, I think Fat Belly Pretzel, you know, if you ask me, because we're all over the board, you know, everything we do is a hybrid. Everything Fat Belly Pretzel does is a hybrid. It comes from, you know, my experience, my vast and varied experience, from fine dining to boutique hotels to fast casual to large scale, you know, catering operations or multi-unit operations. But yet also it's a bakery, so we're doing very small things. But our menu has grown from just this humble, like, hey, we're just going to make a couple pretzels and make some people happy. Well, then we start drawing inspiration from my love affair with the American South, from the inspiration that I get from the technique of European bakeries, which, it doesn't get more European bakery than a pretzel. I mean, it's a matter of
Sure.
fact.
German, yeah.
Well, actually, Italian, believe it or
Italian.
not. Believe it or not, yeah.
Uh-huh.
It was an Italian. Well, I mean, Italian by proxy. It was an Italian baker. Is I believe they're recorded, but this was also in that northern part, closer to Germany. But still, I mean, when you think of a pretzel, you think of a German thing. So, drawing inspiration from where we are and paying homage to the techniques from the European bakeries, and our menus expand to have all kinds of stuff now. We do these pretzel danishes, and we have, these pretzel crunch cookies where we take the pretzels and we cut them up and we make a malted pretzel crunch, and we put that into a chocolate chip cookie. So you have like this American, funky, collaboration thing going on. This pretzel muffaletta, which is also, inspired by Italian food, but it's very much Louisiana, New Orleans thing. So we draw those inspirations, and I think ultimately, if I had to put my thumb on it, the future of Fat Belly could be a bakery / delicatessen. And when I say delicatessen, I mean like the true European kind of thought of a delicatessen, which is more like a market / hey, you should try these jams and jellies. We think they're the best ones that they're out there, or here's this really great ham that somebody makes here in Tennessee, and he only makes it 3 times a year. So, try this. So I don't know. I love food so much, Emmanuel. If you haven't picked that up from our conversations that we've had,
yes,
it's really hard to put the eggs in one basket. I just want to spread that love like mustard.
Very good. We can hashtag that. So,
yeah, that is our hashtag.
I know. So where do you see the industry going?
Oh man, I have dear friends that have either closed their restaurants or on the brink of closing. But I think prior to March 2020, there was a lot of noise going on, not only in the restaurant world, but just in the world in general. And what essentially I think has happened has been a really hard reset for a lot of restaurants. And again, in how we do and what we do. I think it's time to focus on what is essential to our industry, and again, just, I think that's what I was trying to get at earlier with the conversation between, or the relationship between consumer or customer and a restaurant and restaurateur. There still is a lot of noise out there. And now more than ever is a time that we need to advocate for small, independent restaurants and restaurateurs. Otherwise, our industry could very well end up being kind of a large, big boys, big players only. And that's pretty one-sided. And that's not what, gastronomy is about. That's not what the food industry is about. It's not a one-sided thing. It's not a one-stop shop.
I mean, it's interesting what you are saying here, obviously, but you just used the word, gastronomy. Do you feel that with those changes that are happening at the moment, that gastronomy is over?
I don't think so. I really don't. And I don't think that it ever will. Just because the need to feed, to nurture, to create will always be there. And I think that gastronomy won't necessarily go away, or, I don't want to say die. That sounds so, kind of dramatic, but I think it's always evolving, and I think that what we are seeing, what we're witnessing, is kind of the sentimental end of a time period, that was very beautiful and very inspiring for a lot of chefs. Myself, I certainly look back to, think about when the French Laundry Cookbook came out. That was like this tablet that came down from the mountains. We were all looking at this stuff like, wow, this is incredible. that stuff is kind of slowly coming to a little bit of a halt. But at the same time, I think that it will continue to grow and evolve because it always wasn't that way. It was almost as if we just kind of went through this beautiful Renaissance period, so to speak. And after the Renaissance came the Age of Enlightenment. So, I think that what I'm excited for what the future of gastronomy will be, and I'm willing to accept that it may not be what it used to be, but I know that whatever it is, it will continue to inspire and grow. So as long as people are inspired by food, and I think that'll never go away.
You talked about, the creative aspect. You talk about that obviously, a chef has this artistic, mind. On the other end, you share, and it was obvious when you said it, this passion that you have about simple things and things that you are sharing, with, your customers. And that's the experience that you have at the moment, at the Fat Belly Pretzels, where you are handing, those delicious warm pretzels, to someone. So you have those two different schools of thoughts. And what is the most important aspect for you as a chef between this beautiful artistic creation versus like this, I would say, simple execution that connects people?
If I'm coming to the table with the right perspective, then I can have both. I can make something that is truly beautiful to me, that celebrates the whatever deep connection that I think that I have or that I feel for a certain cuisine or whatever that inspiration was. Or maybe, I'm so inspired by the turnips that the farmer grew just a few hours away, and they're so beautiful that I have to come up with this, study in turnips with 12 different preparations or whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, though, as a chef, whatever it is that I'm doing or making has a deep and personal impact on somebody else. So ultimately, at the end of the day, I want that person to enjoy and feel something. If they have just as much as an aha moment as I had, then that's a double win. But at the end of the day, I want to make that person feel good. I think that the connection with people, in my opinion, is where the real magic is in this industry. And so I think that those two, the creativity and the connection with people, they're hand in hand. You got to have a balance, because if I'm only doing things just to satisfy me, well, at the end of the day, I'm only satisfying myself.
Sure. And you may not have a business at the end.
Sure. Correct. Yeah, exactly.
So you have been chefs and executive chefs in very different business models. You have been in restaurant in part of the hotel. You have been in private restaurants, fast casual concepts, and now you are, a food entrepreneur. So can you tell us what are the pro and the cons, of all those different, models?
Sure. I've been very, very blessed and fortunate to kind of cover that spectrum of food service industry. My experience particularly with boutique hotels, I never worked for one of those big box type hotels, like by the airport or something like that. It's not to discredit what they do, because everything has its place in this big puzzle. But, my experience with boutique hotels or in that kind of setting was really fundamental from a hospitality perspective and my growth as a food and beverage professional. Those kind of situations to me is really tries to encompass the hospitality piece, right? Where it's not like I've seen in some, not all, but in some private restaurant situations where a guest request can be met with well, we don't do that here. This is not what we do. To a certain extent, I mean, I understand and respect people's art and their statement. And, I'm not going to walk into, a Southern American restaurant and ask, hey, can you make me some sushi? That's not what I'm talking about. But the business and financial operational knowledge that I picked up working in something outside of just something that was just food focused only food focused was huge. That translates to being a good chef, operator, owner, manager, whatever it may be, is understanding the fundamentals of business. So I think that's huge. There's just this kind of a spectrum with chefs. There's like the artist, creative type, and then there's like the scientist, mathematician type. And if you lean too much on either side of that, I think there'll be some drawbacks to it. I know some of the most I know some really, really creative and talented chefs that can make the most beautiful, delicious food, and they can't read a P&L to save their lives or their livelihoods. And on the same note, I know guys that are so good at running their business, but it almost becomes a formula, and it's formulaic, and their food has no soul. It's just like, I think it's important to be right in the middle. So to me, that's been my approach and it's the same way that I approach cooking. Is if I'm going to make something like mac and cheese, I want to understand everything about the mac and cheese before I start freestyling. And that's what I'm going to end up doing anyway. But at least I know the parameters and where it came from. So, I think the drawbacks, the downsides are really what you make of them. Right. I think that from my experience, there's been something very beneficial to take away from my experience as a fast casual operator, as a corporate executive chef, as a culinary director, as a line cook. Every single experience has something for you to pick up and put down.
But was it easy for you to move to one model to another? Because, we love, not only in this country, it's true everywhere. As human beings, we love to put labels on people.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is that this is as well a specific mindset, and ways of working for each, situation here and sometimes, individuals have a hard time to adapt, from one to another. So coming from like a restaurant into like a hotel, mindset, or, a fast casual, it's really different because you are using different skills. And
yeah, 100%. And again, you nailed it. It boils down to the individual, right? But I think that if you can adjust your perspective and you look for the similarities rather than the differences, then it's really, really quick to adapt, right? Like, just like with the pandemic, and all of a sudden things are not normal anymore. Well, then rather than focusing on the fact that, well, that's not how I'm used to doing it, and that's not how it goes, because that's how I've always done it at the last place. It's not the same to put out a banquet for, 200 people than it is to, serve 3,000 people on a, and keep, low ticket times and quick and high check, and just turn it out for a fast casual situation. But it kind of is if you apply the same principles, whether that's, quality ingredients, good leadership. I think leadership is the number one thing, right? Going back to if your head is in the right place, it's kind of hard to fail. It's really all about perspective, all of it.
You mentioned that you are originally from California. Then you end up after that in the Northeast, in the vineyards, area. Then you move to Louisville in Kentucky. Now you're in Nashville in Tennessee. So I travel like all around the country, but I'm curious to see your point of view on how would you describe like the food scenes at these different locations, and how do you see them, like different from one another?
Sure. Well, it's fascinating how different things can be, and yet how much of it is the same. And I think that food is a really powerful narrator of culture, right? Who was here before? Who came here? What happened next? Where are we going? And so like California, for example, was so special to me in my culinary roots and my approach, because California is a melting pot of cultures, and you've been there and we've talked about it. But you've got this melting pot of cultures, and it's backed up with this very strong agricultural resource, right? There's nothing. I mean, California produce makes everyone in the world jealous, right? But then because of all of that, there's a little bit of a rebellious kind of nature to it. Like everyone in California tends to color outside the lines. And you've got, you want to do Mexican, Chinese food? Okay, fine, let's do it. And then New England is so humble and so pragmatic and so honest. It's so simple. Drawing bounty from the Atlantic Ocean, the bountiful Atlantic Ocean. And then on top of that, you have to be resourceful because there ain't shit that grows there in the wintertime. There's not much. So I like to go old school, right? And you asked me about the food scene in places that I've been. I'm real quick to look at what's the food that's being eaten here, what's from here. Not so much what's the hot restaurant doing, because those hot restaurants are 9 times out of 10 drawing inspiration from what was being done here before. Like what are the roots and the culture there? And then there's the American South, which I've had this ongoing love affair for the past, over 10 years now, which is such a beautiful, rich, albeit painful story about its food and its food ways and where it came from and how it evolved to what it is now. And, Southern food is not all fried chicken and barbecue and shit like that. It's far from that. It's far from that. There's a beautiful history of food preservation in like the Appalachian parts of the country.
Yep.
There's that beautiful rice culture that's just peppered with African history along the coast.
Low country.
Low country stuff. Yeah. So all the food scenes to me, they're all so different and beautiful. But what I love about them is they all tell a story. Because that's what food does. Food tells the truth. Stylistically, California is my heart. Again, that's where San Francisco and California is where I truly fell in love with this idea of like, hey, I want to cook for the rest of my life. That's the number one thing I want to do. It's what I do. It's what I do when I'm not doing it for work. And we were talking before the podcast, and you asked me if I cook at home, and yeah, I'm the chef in residence here. I cook 7 meals out of 10.
So, and I think like in California, this is where as well you started to develop a relationship with like the purveyors and the farmers over there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you have developed like this great understanding of local ingredients. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about this approach that you have with, the farmers and how do you build, this close relationship and almost like collaboration, I would say, with them?
Yeah. And I think collaboration is really, really, you took the words out of my mouth. I've had the pleasure and the opportunity to, a lot of the places that I've been partners with or worked with, we usually have a pretty substantial purchasing power within these communities. Well, with that comes a responsibility. I think that we start with the obvious opportunities, whether it's menu or community need or community outreach. I'll give you an example. When I was the corporate executive chef for a small boutique hotel group in New England, we also had one property in Florida, and I would go down to Florida and kind of work there 10 days out of the month. And I'd travel between, Martha's Vineyard in Florida and all that stuff. So, but it was always very, I thought it was crazy that as I was driving to the property, I would drive past all these produce stands and farm stands and all this other stuff. And then I get to the restaurant and, we're unloading lemons and oranges from the Cisco truck, and I understand, I get it. There's the collaboration piece there is the important part. The responsible thing to do when it comes to supporting local agriculture is to really kind of get to know them the same way you would get to know your line cooks, your dishwashers, or whomever it is that you are working with. That's part of your team. And to understand what their goals are and how you can contribute to their growth through purchasing, or if it's developing plans for, hey, listen, let's plan menus, and these are the resources that we need. What can we do to help you with those resources? It's a balance not to exhaust the resources and to develop relationships with those farmers and producers. I want to know their goals and not just buy everything they have because I can. And it's also too, I mean, you can't, it's not feasible at times, depending on the operation, to do those things. You have to be creative in how you can maximize the local support within the general expectation. It's everywhere. You just have to dig. You have to work for it. Chefs are in a very unique position to be advocates for this kind of stuff. That because no matter what, if you think people aren't looking or aren't listening at whatever level, whether you're on a podcast or you're just operating your small independent restaurant, is that, if you say something's good, 9 times out of 10, the consumer is going to take your word for it. Oh, I like this guy's food. Well, this guy really likes, Bear Creek Farm beef. Well, I need to get some Bear Creek Farm beef for my house too, So it's really important how that trickle down advocacy works, not only for the farmer and the rancher, but then it also works for the restaurant to advocate those things for the community. It's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
Not just making sandwiches, guys,
So let's talk a little bit about your cooking and what you have done as well in the past. So the overall picture. What are your sources of inspiration?
My sources of inspiration are usually, again, they come from kind of core values that simple is key, right? Simple is key, and environment always wins and always dictates.
Mm-hmm.
Like where are my feet? And that's where I am. And that's kind of where the inspiration is. My heritage, I know that my name, Levon Wallace, is a dead giveaway that I'm of Mexican heritage, right? Just like, when I first heard your accent, I thought I could have sworn that you were from Alabama.
Absolutely. A lot of people had confused that. Absolutely. They said, "Oh, you have an Alabama accent." So
you clearly go. Yeah, roll Tide.
I told you I never heard that before. That was the first time.
Yeah, no, I joke, but my Mexican heritage, and I grew up in a Mexican household. My mother's Mexican. I don't know anything else but that, and I grew up eating those foods. And the more I kind of dig my heels into it. I mean, it's a complex, beautiful cuisine. But it's also it's almost comical how some of the technique that is there is so almost primitive, and I think that's what makes it so damn good, because it's elemental, it's simple. So my inspiration usually comes from keeping things as simple as possible, but then on top of that, you add the layers of experience. You add the layers of environmental inspiration, right? Whether it's, I'll never forget the first time I went to a farmer's market in San Francisco. I mean, it was like 3D, kaleidoscope, like what is going on here? Like, I've never seen a tomato that had more than, that wasn't just red and wasn't a perfect, ball. At least coming from Los Angeles, California, at least where I grew up, we didn't have all we had were Roma tomatoes, and they're gross, So I draw inspiration from environment. I draw inspiration from, the elements, and then just it's whatever's going on right then and there.
So you start with obviously the produce, but when you are thinking about your creative approach, what's the next step after? So you're talking about your heritage, like Mexican, heritage as well, like the locality of, where you are. Yeah. So can you explain to me on like the different steps on your creative process when you are creating a dish?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, kind of made this podcast a little more complicated than it used to be. It's kind of, as much as I talk about keeping things simple, I wish that I could keep things simple up here in my head because I can't.
No, that's fine. And I don't want as well to intellectualize like the conversation, but I think it is interesting. For me, it's always I go to a restaurant and I always look at the menu. I always pick something that I do not know, I never experienced before, something that intrigued me. And my first thing that comes to my mind when, of course, I am enjoying the dish. Of
Yeah.
course, it's a moment of pleasure, but there's always something in the back of my mind to say like, what was the original like idea behind it, and how did the chef came up with this? What was like the different step that he took to create this outstanding experience for me?
Yeah, I understand 100%. On the back end, for me, it's the same way because if I'm inspired by something, or if I'm in a kind of free form, loose and creative mood to come up with a dish, I can be a little bit of an extremist, and I tend to obsess, and I want to learn about this ingredient. Where did it come from? How has it been made before? This particular dish, I want to practice it. I want to unpack it. I want to unfold it. Whatever it is that I'm doing, kind of like a kid that takes apart a radio to see how it works on the inside. And that's exactly how when I first came across the American South, it was the same thing. I want to, why are tamales in Mississippi the way that they are? When I was in New England and I had a stuffed quahog for the first time, like where's this dish come from? What's this Portuguese influence that is in New England? Okay, let's explore this Portuguese influence. And so I fill my head with all this information just to be able to to tell myself to relax and just have fun with it. At the end of the day, it's kind of a weird, yin and yang that goes on with the creative process. But I don't know, man. This is how I am. I genuinely love not only to cook, right? Like there's something so like special about the act of cooking. It's almost like everything just kind of melts away, and it's just you and what it is that you're making at that point. It's alchemy, really, when you think about it, right? I'm gonna turn this potato into something really delicious and amazing, and it's just I don't know, man. It's hard to it's addictive for me that I forget that there's somebody on the other side like you that's like, wow, what is this thing? How did he come up with this dish? Or what's your favorite dish to make? I don't know. They're all my favorite dishes to make.
Let's think about, maybe like some of the most unusual association that you have created. You see, you have this West Coast background. You are in the South, now. So I'm sure there's things that are, in the mind of someone else looking from the outside, maybe are conflicting, but that's maybe like the opposite attracts, if you want, in terms of the concept.
Sure.
Things that maybe sweet flavors that you're putting in its savory dish, or the reverse, or if there's any. I'm always curious to discuss with chefs about some of those most unusual association, because they come from a different genre and people will never think about, but in fact at the end it's outstanding.
I mean, obviously, I've never invented anything, right? Because we're always borrowing and improvising and doing all these things. But there was this one particular festival that I was at, I think about 2 years ago, in Arkansas, and originally I was going to make salsa macha, which is pre-Hispanic, kind of an oil-based salsa. Usually is like dried seeds and dried chilies and oil. And like out of nowhere, I was like, it hit me. I'm like, oh, what is really good is like chili crisp. Chinese. This is very similar to Chinese chili crisp. The one with the angry little lady on the picture there, on the label. And I just so happened to be making some smoked chickens at the time for this dish. I was going to do like a chicken tostada thing. And I'd smoked the chickens and I pulled the skins off and I threw all the skins in the deep fryer. They were going to be a snack for, the staff or whatnot. So then there it goes. I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. Now here we have this like Southern American and arguably African dish, right? With the barbecued smoked meat and chicken for that matter. No, here's that. And then there's this, Mexican idea, which was the salsa macha. But then we then took it and gave it a nod to the Chinese chili crisp. And so what we ended up doing is we took those fried smoked chicken skins, which basically was a chicken chicharrones at that point.
Okay.
And we took those chicken chicharrones and we busted those up and we made the salsa macha, both the inclusion of fried peanuts and fried soybeans and fried sesame seeds, along with the dried chilies and the herbs and the fried garlic, and combined it all to make this, what I call it, Mexican chili crisp. And what it was fried chicken skins, fried peanuts, fried sesames, fried dried chilies, and it was this beautiful, umami, crunchy, smoky, spicy condiment that we ended up serving with this chicken tostada. And to give it another notch to the African culture, a little bit of preserved watermelon. So the preserved watermelon and the smoked chicken gave it a nod to the Southern African roots, the chilies and the kind of salsa macha base, but then the peanuts and the sesame gave it the Asian touch. It was just, it was Chinese Southern Mexican without being annoying, without being weird. It was just delightful.
Are you okay to go into like the rapid fire question now?
Yeah, order
okay.
Fire. Absolutely.
So you and I are going into a tasting tour in Nashville. And obviously, this is not thinking about that we are in a pandemic. So what are like the 5 spots that you will take me to?
We have a beautiful Kurdish community here. So I would take you to one of a couple amazing Kurdish bakeries and restaurants. And it's going to be things that you're not going to think Nashville, right? We have a place called King Market, which is one of my favorite restaurants, and it's in the back of an Asian supermarket. It's a small little cafe, legitimately some of the best Lao Thai food that I've ever had. There's a couple of places that you would have to that are so quintessentially Nashville. I would take you to your first meat and three experience, which is this kind of, cafeteria style Arnold's meat and three, for example, which is, legendary. And they do it right? So what is normally like, you think cafeteria style and you think of like really gross, food from a can, where no, these guys are they're tapping into the community resources as much as possible. I would take you to get the best biscuit of your life by my friends Carl and Sarah Worley and their chef Lisa White. They have a place called Biscuit Love, and they do an amazing job. Nashville is becoming so much like such a melting pot, just like Los Angeles. I said, is you can get some of the best pizza. Like I've got a friend who has a place called St. Vito's Focacceria, and he's making world-class Sicilian-style pizza in Nashville.
Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you. So what's your favorite guilty pleasure food?
I really like to take a pack of Mama instant ramen noodles.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Mama brand. And I follow the directions minus a little bit of the water. And the last minute of cooking, I crack one egg into the pot and I poach my egg in the broth.
Uh-huh.
The last 30 seconds, I take one slice of American cheese and I put it right on top.
Okay.
And more likely than not, I have some bacon that's been cooked. I chop a little bit of bacon and I put a big handful of green onions. And I have this like bacon, egg, and cheese ramen thing that is, and if I have some Mexican chili crisp in the fridge, it's really, really good.
You put that on top. Okay.
Put that on top, yeah.
Absolutely. What are like the 3 cookbooks that inspire you the most in your career?
Oh, wow. The American Masters have always been a really big inspiration, right? Like there's some really, really, I have way too many cookbooks. Right. Most of my colleagues do. I'm sure that you do too. But like it's like the Patrick O'Connells and the Charlie Palmers and the Charlie Trotter, like I had the pleasure of staging there, and it's stuff that like I flew myself out on my 27th birthday to stage at Charlie Trotter's. I got there at 11 o'clock in the morning, and I left that night. The next morning, it was like 3 or 4 in the morning. We're done with service. And that was it. That was my birthday present to myself at 27 years old, was to go stage at Charlie Trotter's, because I love all of the American masters. So I think that the Charlie Trotter cookbook, the original French Laundry cookbook, and the Ariel cookbook, to me, when the Ariel cookbook was like, that was our Michel Bras at the time. Like that was our Pierre Gagné. That was our like, oh wow, this is happening. This is great.
What's your biggest pet peeves in the kitchen?
Oh, how much time do you got?
I said the biggest.
Yeah,
not all of them.
Right. Well, I'm going to focus on the pet peeves, the really like little petty stuff, right? Like, no, I haven't seen it in a long time, but like people that like when you're using a peeler over the trash can, like this drives me crazy. It drives me so crazy. Like, what are you doing? Like, it's your station. Is a trash can your station? No. But now let's get a little more current, a little more 2021. One of my biggest pet peeves in the kitchen is, the old mentality that this is what we do, this is how we do. Like there's a little more there's a lot more inclusion, a lot more understanding to work and life balance. So it's not a pet peeve that we're there. It's a pet peeve that we used to be there, and that sometimes people tend to gravitate back towards that. I'm excited and hopeful for the new ideology that it doesn't have to be this horrible life experience for it to be the grand cuisine. No more yelling and screaming in the kitchen. Don't like, and excessive cussing. I don't like excessive cussing in the kitchen. Don't like it.
Okay.
Don't like it.
Final question. So beside the classics like mayo, mustard, and so on, what condiments, spices, or sauces do you like to have on hand at home?
You said besides mayo, because I want to touch base on that. I'm a little bit of a mayo-phile, and I always have at least 2, sometimes 3 different kinds of mayonnaise in the fridge. Yeah, and I think that they all lend themselves to different things. Like I think that Duke's mayonnaise is absolutely delicious. But I also think that Blue Plate mayonnaise makes a wonderful po' boy, and Southern. It's a little sweeter, so it lends itself better to Southern style sandwiches. And QP is just delicious on cold pizza. I just can't have. That's one of my favorite pizza. The shittier the pizza, the better too. But in as far as condiments, you'll find a pretty extensive selection in my Asian pantry. There's always some kind of, it's almost too much. I mean, just every
fish sauce, all of that.
Everything, yeah. And then there's the other pantry, which is like the homemade pantry, whether it's dried mushrooms that we found when we were hiking, or salted or preserved vegetables or fruits. A lot of that. I love that part of Southern culture. I know that it exists in every culture, but I get very excited in the spring and summer months here, not so much about what's coming in fresh, but rather what's that going to look like, and what can I turn it into to put in a can for me to eat in the summer, or in the fall.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you do a lot of foraging?
Do as much foraging as we can. Who doesn't like free food? You
just need to know what you're doing, but I'm sure you do.
You know what you're doing. But there's a lot of there's opportunities everywhere. Obviously it's important that you read and that you know what you're doing, but you'd be surprised how most of the country has oyster mushrooms in their little walkways and paths.
Mm-hmm.
Or woodier mushrooms are an abundance here in the Southeast.
Yeah.
Ramps, wild onions,
leaves,
wild garlic out here. So,
oh, really?
Yeah.
Which one, the green or the purple?
No, you can find them both.
Both, okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
both.
Very cool. Chef, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. It was a very enlightening conversation.
Well, it's very kind of you to say that, Emmanuel. It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Flavors Unknown podcast with Chef Levon Wallace from Nashville, Tennessee. You can find the show notes of this episode on the website flavorsunknown.com, and please follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Flavors Unknown. If you like this episode, please share it with a colleague or a friend. You can do it directly from your phone. If you are listening on Apple Podcast, click to the purple circle with the 3 white dots, click share, and then send it via text message. If you are listening on Spotify, just click on the 3 white dots and scroll down to the share option, and then share it as a text message. Thank you so much. Next week, my guest is going to be someone completely different from all the guests I had until now. I had the opportunity to interview the food critic John Mariani from New York City. John Mariani is an author and journalist of 30 years standing. He has begun his career at the New York Magazine. He has written as well in the Esquire magazine and in the Huffington Post. So with Mr. Mariani, we are going to hear about the different type of food critics. How did he start his career? And what made him interested in writing about restaurants, chefs, and food? He's going to share with us how he sees the future of the restaurant industry and if the time of gastronomy and fine dining is over. I see you in 2 weeks, and until then, remember that people who love to eat are always the best people.
Thanks for listening to Flavors Unknown. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave a review. Find the show notes at flavorsunknown.com. And if you want to join the Flavors Unknown community, search Flavors Unknown on Instagram and Twitter.